Margaret had always been an early riser. Even at 45, she woke before dawn to watch the sun paint. The sky pink and gold over the vast gardens of Willowbrook Manor. This morning felt different, though. There was a heaviness in the air that made her stomach twist with worry. 20-3 years. That's how long she had been the lady of this grand estate. 23 years of managing servants, hosting dinner parties, and keeping the household running smoothly while her husband built his fortune. She remembered their wedding day when she was just 22, full of hope and dreams about the life they would build together. Back then, Lord William had been different. He was ambitious, but kind, working hard to expand his small inheritance into something magnificent. Margaret had stood by his side through everything, the failed business ventures, the sleepless nights planning their future, and the joy of watching their 3 children take their first steps in these very halls. But success had changed him. As his wealth grew, so did his pride and his wandering eye. The man who once brought her wildflowers from their garden now barely looked at her during their evening meals. The husband who used to seek her advice on important matters now made decisions without even telling her. Margaret caught her reflection in the bedroom mirror as she brushed her silver-streaked hair. When had these lines appeared around her eyes? When had her once golden hair begun to fade? She touched her face gently, remembering when William used to trace these same features with loving fingers. The house was already bustling with activity when she made her way downstairs. The cook was preparing breakfast while the maids cleaned the main hall. They all greeted her with warm smiles and respectful bows. These people had become like family to her over the years. She knew their children's names, their struggles, and their dreams. "Good morning, my lady," said Mrs. Chun, the head housekeeper. "Lord William is already in his study. He's been there since before sunrise." Margaret's heart sank a little. William spent more and more time locked away in that room, dealing with business that he claimed was too complicated for her to understand. She missed the days when he would share his plans with her. When her opinions mattered to him, she knocked softly on the study door and waited for his gruff permission to enter. William sat behind his massive oak desk, papers scattered everywhere. He looked tired, older than his. 48 years? His dark hair was now completely gray at the temples. "William, you missed dinner again last night," she said gently, settling into the chair across from his desk. "The children were asking for you." He didn't look up from his papers. "I was busy. The shipping contracts won't negotiate themselves." "No, your work is important, but the children need their father. Elizabeth is getting married next month, and James starts university in the fall. These moments with them are precious." Finally, William raised his eyes to meet hers, but there was no warmth there, only irritation. "Don't you think I know that? Don't you think I'm working this hard for them, for this family?" Margaret felt the familiar sting of his sharp words. This wasn't the conversation she had planned to have, but she couldn't stop herself from continuing. "Of course you are. I just worry that you're missing their childhood while you're building their future. And I worry that you don't understand the pressure I'm under," William snapped, standing up abruptly. "You sit in this comfortable house, managing servants and planning parties, while I carry the weight of our entire fortune on my shoulders." The unfairness of his words hit her like a physical blow. "That's not fair, William. I've given everything to this family, to supporting your dreams. I've never complained about the long hours or the constant entertaining of your business partners. Given everything?" William's voice was getting louder now. "What exactly have you given, Margaret? You've grown old and comfortable while I've built this empire. Look at yourself. When was the last time you made an effort to be the woman I married?" Margaret felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I'm the same woman you married, William. I'm just older. We both are—" "No," he said coldly. "You've, become a burden. An aging reminder of simpler times that I've outgrown." The words hung in the air between them like poison. Margaret felt something break inside her chest. After all these years, after everything they had built together, this was how he saw her. Not as his partner, not as the mother of his children, but as a burden. "I see," she whispered, standing on shaky legs. I understand now. She turned to leave, hoping to preserve what little dignity she had left, but William's next words stopped her cold. Actually, I don't think you do understand. Your behavior lately has been unacceptable. Questioning my decisions, interrupting my work, acting like you have some right to demand my attention. Margaret turned back slowly, fear creeping up her spine. William, what are you saying? I'm saying that it's time you learned your place in this household. You want to know what I think about your constant complaints? Your demands for attention? I'll show you exactly what I think. He walked to the door and threw it open, his voice booming through the hallway. Everyone to the main hall! Now, the servants came running from every corner of the house, confusion and worry written on their faces. The cook still had flour on her apron, and the gardener had dirt under his fingernails. Margaret's 3 children appeared too, Elizabeth, 19, and beautiful, James, 17 and serious. And little Anne, just 12 years old. Margaret stood frozen as her family and servants gathered in the grand entrance hall beneath the crystal chandelier that had been a wedding gift from her parents, the same chandelier under which she had danced with William on their 5th anniversary, the same place where they had celebrated each of their children's birthdays. William positioned himself at the top of the marble staircase, looking down at everyone like a king addressing his subjects. Margaret remained at the bottom, feeling smaller with each passing second. I have an announcement to make, William declared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. It concerns Lady Margaret and her future role in this household. The servants shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't normal. In all their years of service, Lord William had never called such a public meeting. Margaret's children looked between their parents with growing alarm. Father, what's happening? Elizabeth asked, moving closer to her mother. William ignored his daughter's question and continued. Lady Margaret has forgotten her place. She has become too comfortable, too demanding, and frankly, too aged to fulfill the duties of a lord's wife. Gasps echoed through the hall. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. Surely he wouldn't humiliate her like this in front of everyone. Not in front of their children. Therefore, William continued, his voice growing colder with each word, she will no longer hold the position of lady of this house. From this day forward, Margaret will serve as companion to Daniel, our head groundskeeper. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt the world spinning around her. Daniel, the quiet man who had worked their gardens for the past 15 years, stood near the back of the crowd looking as shocked as everyone else. William, no, Margaret whispered, but her voice was lost in the chaos that followed. Father, you can't be serious. James stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger and embarrassment. I am completely serious, William replied. Your mother needs to learn humility. She needs to understand what real work looks like, what it means to serve rather than be served. Margaret looked around the room at the faces of people who had respected her, served her, loved her. Now they looked at her with pity and confusion. Her children's faces showed horror and shame. This was worse than anything she could have imagined. The beautiful life she had spent 23 years building crumbled around her in a matter of minutes. Everything she had worked for, sacrificed for, dreamed of, gone because she had dared to ask for her husband's attention, gone because time had touched her face and silvered her hair, gone because the man she loved had decided she was no longer worthy of his name. Margaret walked slowly toward the servants' quarters, carrying nothing but a small bag with her most basic belongings. Her elegant silk dress felt out of place as she made her way past the vegetable gardens and tool sheds. The afternoon sun beat down on her shoulders, and she realized she had never walked this path before in all her years at Willowbrook Manor. The servants' cottages were simple but well maintained, each with a small garden and wooden fence. She had always made sure these homes were properly cared for, but she had never actually visited them. Now one of them would be her home. The thought made her stomach turn with a mixture of fear and shame. Daniel's cottage sat at the end of the row, slightly larger than the others because of his position as head groundskeeper. Roses climbed the walls, and the small front garden was perfectly arranged with colorful flowers. Even in her current state, Margaret couldn't help but admire the beauty he had created in this modest space. She knocked hesitantly on the wooden door, her hands trembling. What was she supposed to say? How was she supposed to act? William had given her no instructions beyond his cruel announcement. She only knew that she was no longer welcome in the main house, no longer welcome at her own dining table. Daniel opened the door, and Margaret was struck by how different he looked up close. She had seen him working in the gardens for years, but always from a distance. He was about 40 years old, with kind brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of honest work. His dark hair was streaked with early gray, and there was a gentleness in his face that she hadn't expected. "My lady," he said softly, stepping back to let her enter. His voice carried a slight accent that reminded her he had been born in a different country, brought to England as a child when his family sought a better life. "Please, don't call me that anymore," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a lady anymore." William made that very clear. Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of Lord William, but he kept his voice gentle. "In my eyes, you will always be deserving of respect. What Lord William has done today, it's not right." Margaret looked around the small cottage, trying to adjust to her new reality. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a simple wooden table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace. Everything was clean and organized, but it was smaller than her former bedroom's sitting area. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here," she admitted, sitting heavily in one of the chairs. "I don't know what he expects from me, from us." Daniel pulled out the other chair and sat across from her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Lord William's expectations don't matter right now. What matters is that you're safe and treated with dignity." "Dignity?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "I was just stripped of everything. I'm in front of my children, my servants, everyone I've known for over 20 years. Where's the dignity in that?" "The dignity," Daniel said quietly, "is in how we choose to move forward. What was done to you was cruel and unjust, but you're still the same person you were this morning. You're still the woman who remembered my mother's birthday every year, who made sure the servants' children had warm clothes for winter, who never looked down on anyone no matter their station." Margaret felt tears threatening again. She had forgotten that Daniel's elderly mother lived in the village, that she had indeed made sure the woman received food and medicine when she was ill. Such small acts of kindness seemed meaningless now. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. "My parents are gone, my sister lives too far away, and I have no money of my own. Everything I thought was mine actually belongs to him." "Then you'll stay here," Daniel said simply. "But not as Lord William intended." "You'll stay as my guest, as someone deserving of respect and kindness?" Margaret looked at him in surprise. "But he said I was to be your your—" "I know what he said." Daniel's voice had an edge to it now. "But I am not Lord William. I don't see people as possessions to be owned or traded. I see them as human beings with their own worth." He stood up and moved toward a small chest in the corner. "This cottage has only 1 bedroom, but I can sleep out here by the fire. The bed is yours." "I can't take your bed," Margaret protested. "This is your home. I'm the intruder here." "You're not an intruder. You're someone who needs help, and I was raised to help those in need." Daniel pulled a clean blanket from the chest. "My mother always said that how we treat people when they're at their lowest shows who we really are." Margaret watched him prepare a makeshift bed on the floor near the fireplace. This man, who owed her nothing, who had every right to be angry about the situation, was showing her more kindness than her own husband had in years. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You could have just done what he wanted." "Number 1 would have blamed you." Daniel paused in his preparations and looked at her directly. "Because what Lord William did today was wrong. And because I've watched you for years, seen how you treat people. You've never been cruel or demanding like so many of your class. You've always been fair and kind. You've been watching me?" Margaret felt a strange flutter in her chest. Daniel's cheeks reddened slightly. Not in any improper way, my lady. But when you work in the gardens, you see things. I've seen you slip extra food to families who were struggling. I've seen you comfort servants who were upset. I've seen you playing with your children in the garden, teaching them to be kind to everyone, regardless of their position. Margaret had no idea that anyone had noticed these small acts. In her world, they were just the right things to do. She had never thought of them as particularly noteworthy. I've also seen how Lord William has treated you these past few years. Daniel continued, his voice growing harder. How he's dismissed you, ignored you, made you feel small. A man who would do that to someone who has given him everything. That's not a man worthy of respect. The cottage grew quiet except for the sound of birds singing outside the window. Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being truly seen and valued by another person. I don't know how to live like this, she admitted. I don't know how to cook or clean or do any of the things that normal people do. I've had servants my entire adult life. Then I'll teach you, Daniel said with a gentle smile. It's not as complicated as you might think. And there's something satisfying about taking care of yourself, about creating something with your own hands. He moved to the small kitchen area and began preparing tea. Margaret watched his efficient movements, the way he handled each task with care and attention. There was a peace about him that she envied. What was your life like before you came here? She asked, genuinely curious about this man who was showing her such unexpected kindness. Daniel's hands stilled for a moment. Very different from yours. My family came here when I was 8 years old. We had nothing, just the hope of a better life. I started working in gardens when I was 10, learning everything I could about plants and growing things. That must have been difficult. It was, but it taught me that worth doesn't come from what you own or what title you hold. It comes from how you treat others and how hard you're willing to work for what matters to you. He brought her a cup of tea and she noticed how gentle his hands were despite their obvious strength. These were hands that created beauty, that nurtured life from the earth. What matters to you? Margaret asked, surprised by her own boldness. Daniel sat back down across from her, considering his answer carefully. Creating beauty in the world. Even in small ways, treating every living thing with respect. Being someone that others can depend on. He paused, then added quietly, and now, making sure that you're safe and treated with the kindness you deserve. Margaret felt something warm spread through her chest at his words. When was the last time someone had wanted to protect her, to ensure her happiness? She couldn't remember. As the sun began to set outside the small window, Margaret realized that, for the first time all day, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe, in this small cottage with this gentle man, she might find something she hadn't even known she was missing. 3 months had passed since that terrible day in the main hall, and Margaret had settled into a routine she never could have imagined. She woke each morning to the sound of birds singing outside the cottage window, not to the distant chiming of the grandfather clock in the manor house. The simple pleasure of brewing her own tea and watching the sunrise had become something she genuinely looked forward to. Daniel had been incredibly patient with her as she learned basic skills that most people took for granted. The first time she tried to cook breakfast, she had burned the eggs so badly that smoke filled the entire cottage. Instead of being frustrated or angry, Daniel had simply opened the windows and laughed gently. My mother burned dinner at least once a week when I was growing up, he had said, cleaning the pan without complaint. She always said that's how you know someone is trying something new. Now Margaret could prepare simple meals, mend torn clothing, and even help with some of the lighter garden work. Her hands, once soft and pristine, now bore small calluses and dirt under the fingernails. Surprisingly, she didn't mind. There was something honest about these marks of real work. This particular morning, she found Daniel already outside, carefully, tending to a section of roses that had been damaged in the previous night's storm. She had learned to read his moods over these months together. The way he moved when he was content, the careful attention he paid to wounded plants, the gentle way he spoke to everything growing in his care. How bad is the damage? She asked, bringing him a cup of coffee. This had become their morning ritual. She would bring him his first drink of the day while he assessed what work needed to be done. "Not too terrible," Daniel replied, accepting the cup with a grateful smile. "This old rosebush has survived worse storms than last night. She just needs a little extra care and attention." Margaret found herself studying his face as he spoke. Over the months, she had noticed things about Daniel that she had never paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. How his voice grew softer when he talked about plants or animals. The careful way he handled everything, as if he understood that all living things deserved gentleness. "Can I help?" she asked. Early on, she had felt awkward offering assistance, unsure if she would only get in the way. But Daniel had never made her feel useless or burdensome. "Of course," he said, handing her a pair of small garden shears. "We need to cut away the broken branches so the healthy ones can grow stronger." Working side by side had become natural for them. Margaret had discovered that she actually enjoyed garden work. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by growing things, about working with her hands to create beauty. She had never experienced this kind of satisfaction when planning elaborate dinner parties or managing household staff. "Daniel," she said as they worked, "can I ask you something personal?" He glanced at her with curiosity. "Of course." "Were you ever married? Did you ever have a family of your own?" Daniel's hand stilled for a moment, and Margaret immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's none of my business." "No, it's all right," Daniel said quietly. "I was engaged once, many years ago, to a wonderful woman named Catherine who worked in the village bakery." "What happened?" Margaret asked gently, though she sensed this might be a painful subject. "Lord William happened," Daniel said, his voice carrying a sadness that made Margaret's heart ache. "When he learned that 2 of his servants were planning to marry, he decided it would be inconvenient. He told Catherine's father that he would no longer buy bread from their bakery if the marriage proceeded. Her family depended on that income. Margaret felt sick to her stomach. So she broke the engagement? She had no choice. Her family would have lost everything." Daniel continued working, but Margaret could see the old pain in his movements. She married the blacksmith's son instead. They have 4 children now. She's happy, and that's what matters. "I'm so sorry," Margaret whispered. "I had no idea William could be so cruel to his own servants." "It wasn't the first time he interfered in people's lives when it suited him," Daniel said. "But I learned something important from that experience. Love isn't just about what you feel, it's about what you're willing to sacrifice for someone else's happiness." Margaret thought about those words as they continued working. What had she and William ever sacrificed for each other? She had given up her independence, her friendships, her own dreams to support his ambitions, but what had he ever given up for her? "Do you regret staying here all these years?" she asked. "You could have left, found work somewhere else, started fresh." Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There were many reasons to stay. Good work, fair wages, the respect of the other servants, and he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. There were things here worth staying for. Something in his tone made Margaret's heart skip a beat, but she didn't dare assume what he might mean. Instead, she focused on the rosebush in front of her, carefully cutting away a damaged branch. "You're getting good at that," Daniel observed. "You have gentle hands, perfect for this kind of work." "I never thought I'd enjoy physical labor," Margaret admitted. "In my old life, I thought work was something other people did while I managed and organized. But there's something satisfying about actually creating something yourself." "There's dignity in all honest work," Daniel said. "Whether you're growing food to feed people or creating beauty to lift their spirits, what matters is that you care about what you're doing and who it affects." As the morning progressed, they moved to different sections of the garden. Margaret had learned that Daniel didn't just maintain the ornamental areas. He also grew vegetables that fed the servants, families and herbs that the cook used in the main house kitchen. Everything he did served a purpose and helped other people. "I've been thinking," Margaret said as they worked near the herb garden, "about something you said weeks ago, about finding your own worth instead of letting others define it for you." What? About it, I realize I never really knew who I was outside of being William's wife. For 23 years, I defined myself entirely by my role in his life, his success, his needs. I never stopped to think about what I wanted or who I might be on my own. Daniel straightened up from the mint plants he was tending and looked at her seriously. And what have you discovered? Margaret considered the question carefully. I've discovered that I like simple things. I like the feeling of accomplishment when I cook a good meal or mend something that was broken. I like learning new skills and feeling useful. She hesitated, feeling brave. I like spending time with someone who sees me as a person worth knowing, not just a role to be filled. The look Daniel gave her was so warm and understanding that Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. There was something building between them, something she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she should acknowledge. Margaret, Daniel said softly, you are one of the strongest, kindest people I've ever known. What Lord William did to you says nothing about your worth and everything about his character. You really believe that? I know it, Daniel said firmly. I've watched you adapt to a completely different life with grace and determination. I've seen you learn new skills without complaint, treat everyone with respect regardless of their station, and maintain your dignity even when others tried to. Strip it away. That's real strength. Margaret felt tears threatening, but these were different from the tears of humiliation and pain she had cried so often in recent months. These were tears of gratitude and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. For treating me with kindness when you had no reason to. For teaching me that I could be more than I ever thought possible. Thank you, Daniel replied, for letting me get to know the real you. For trusting me with your fears and dreams, for making this cottage feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. As they worked together in comfortable silence, Margaret realized that something fundamental had shifted in her heart. She was no longer just grateful for Daniel's kindness or impressed by his character. She was beginning to feel something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The woman who had been cast aside as too old for love was discovering that her heart was very much alive. The realization hit Margaret like a gentle wave on a quiet shore. She was standing in the cottage kitchen, preparing dinner while Daniel worked late in the gardens, when the truth settled into her heart with startling clarity. She loved him, not with the desperate passion of youth, but with something deeper and more precious, the love of two souls, who had found understanding in each other. The wooden spoon in her hand trembled as she stirred the stew. How had this happened? When had gratitude and friendship transformed into something so much more? She thought back over the past 6 months, searching for the exact moment when her feelings had changed. But there was no single moment. It had been a gradual awakening, like watching the sun rise slowly over the horizon. She loved the way Daniel listened to her stories about her children with genuine interest, never dismissing her maternal concerns. She loved how he explained the needs of different plants with patience and enthusiasm, his face lighting up when she asked questions. She loved the sound of his laughter echoing through their small home, a sound that had become more precious to her than all the grand parties she had once hosted. Most of all, she loved how he saw her, not as a faded lady past her prime, but as a woman still capable of growth, still worthy of respect and affection. When Daniel looked at her, she felt beautiful again, not because of her appearance, but because of who she was becoming under his gentle influence. The sound of the cottage door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Daniel entered, tired from his long day but smiling when he saw her. "Something smells wonderful," he said, washing his hands at the small basin. "You've become quite the cook." "I had a good teacher," Margaret replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the way her heart raced whenever he was near. They ate dinner together, as they did every evening, sharing stories of their day. Daniel told her about the new seedlings he was starting for the spring planting, while Margaret mentioned a letter she had received from her daughter Elizabeth. These simple conversations had become the highlight of her days. Elizabeth is doing well in her new marriage. Margaret said, though sadness crept into her voice. She writes that her husband is kind and that they're expecting their first child. You miss them, Daniel observed, reaching across the small table to gently touch her hand. Your children. Margaret nodded, blinking back tears. I understand. Why they can't visit. William has made it clear that anyone who associates with me risks his displeasure. But it breaks my heart that I might not meet my first grandchild. Daniel's thumb traced softly across her knuckles, a gesture so tender that Margaret felt her breath catch. Perhaps things will change in time. William's anger might cool, especially when there's a grandchild to consider. Maybe, Margaret said, though she doubted it. William's pride ran too deep for easy forgiveness. But I can't live my life waiting for his mercy. I have to find happiness where I am, with what I have. And what do you have? Daniel asked softly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Margaret felt as though they were standing at the edge of a cliff, about to leap into something that would change everything. I have this cottage, she said slowly. I have work that gives me purpose. I have friends among the servants who still treat me with kindness. She paused, gathering her courage. And I have you? Daniel's hand tightened around hers. Margaret ... I? No, it's impossible, she said quickly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I know that people would never accept it, that William would be furious beyond measure. I know that I'm too old, that I have nothing to offer you but a damaged reputation and a complicated past. Stop, Daniel said firmly, standing and pulling her to her feet. Don't you dare say you're too old, or that you have nothing to offer? Don't let his cruelty poison your view of yourself. Margaret looked up at him, this good man who had shown her nothing but kindness. Then what are you saying? Daniel cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm saying that I fell in love with you months ago, and I've been afraid to tell you because I thought you could never feel the same way about someone like me. Someone like you? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, a servant. A man with no title, no fortune, no grand estate to offer you. Margaret reached up to cover his hands with her own. Daniel, you've given me something worth more than any title or fortune. You've given me back my sense of worth. You've shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued for who I am. I love you, he said, the words carrying the weight of months of careful restraint. I love your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you laugh when you succeed at something new. I love how you care for others even when you're struggling yourself. I love the woman you are, not the title you once held. I love you too, Margaret breathed, and saying the words felt like stepping into sunlight after months of shadow. I love your gentle heart, your patient spirit, the way you find beauty in simple things. I love how safe I feel with you, how valued and respected. Daniel leaned down and kissed her then, softly and reverently, as if she were something precious, beyond measure. It was so different from the dutiful kisses of her marriage. This was tender and honest, full of genuine affection and deep respect. When they broke apart, both were trembling slightly. The magnitude of what they had just confessed hung between them like a bridge they had finally found the courage to cross. What do we do now? Margaret asked, her voice shaky with emotion and uncertainty. We take things one day at a time, Daniel said, still holding her close. We're careful because the world won't understand or accept this. But we don't let other people's limitations define what we can feel for each other. Margaret nodded, though worry gnawed at her stomach. William still has power over both our lives. If he discovers our feelings, then we'll face whatever comes. Together, Daniel said. I won't let him hurt you again, Margaret. I promise you that. They spent the evening talking by the firelight, sharing dreams and fears they had never voiced before. Daniel told her about his hope to someday own a small farm where he could grow things freely without answering to anyone. Margaret shared her secret desire to see the ocean, something she had never been allowed to do because William considered such trips frivolous. We could do that together someday, Daniel said, stroking her hair as she rested her head against his shoulder. We could find a little cottage by the sea and grow our own garden. You really think that's possible? Margaret asked, allowing herself to dream of a future she had never dared imagine. With you, I think anything is possible, Daniel replied, and the conviction in his voice made her believe it too. But even as they held each other and planned impossible dreams, neither of them noticed the figure watching from outside the cottage window. Lady Isabella, William's latest young companion, had seen enough to fuel her jealousy and spite. The beautiful woman who felt threatened by the respect Daniel commanded among the servants had found the weapon she needed to destroy them both. As Margaret fell asleep in Daniel's arms for the first time, feeling more cherished than she ever had in her marriage bed. She had no idea that their precious secret was already in jeopardy. Love had found them against all odds. But the forces arrayed against them were already beginning to move. The happiness they had discovered in each other would soon be tested by the cruel realities of a world that couldn't accept their love. Margaret woke to the sound of angry voices outside the cottage. Through the small window, she could see William striding across the garden with several of his men, his face twisted with rage. Behind him walked Lady Isabella, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Margaret's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. "Daniel," she whispered urgently, shaking him awake. "William is coming. He knows." Daniel was instantly alert, years of servant life having taught him to wake quickly when trouble approached. He looked outside and saw the approaching storm of fury heading their way. His jaw tightened, but there was no fear in his eyes, only determination. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, pulling on his shirt and moving toward the door. "No," Margaret said, standing beside him instead. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The cottage door burst open without any knock or warning. William filled the doorway, his expensive clothes and polished boots a stark contrast to the simple home he was invading. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the single bed that had clearly been shared, the intimate way Margaret and Daniel stood side by side. "So it's true," William snarled. "My pathetic excuse for a wife has been playing house?" "With the help." "Lord William," Daniel said, his voice steady and respectful despite the circumstances. "Your quarrel is with me, not with Margaret. She has done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" William's laugh was harsh and bitter. "She's been living in sin. With a servant, disgracing my name even further than I thought possible." "The only disgrace here," Margaret said, finding her voice and her courage, "is how you've treated me. How you've treated all of us." William's eyes blazed with fury. "You dare speak to me that way? After everything I've provided for you? Everything I've given you?" "You gave me nothing," Margaret replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You gave me a title, a house, fine clothes, but you never gave me what mattered. You never gave me respect, understanding, or genuine love." "Love?" William spat. "You think this pathetic groundskeeper can give you love? Look at yourself, Margaret. You're a faded, aging woman living in a servant's hovel. This is what you've chosen over the life I gave you." Daniel stepped forward, his calm demeanor finally cracking. Yes, she chose this life. She chose to be with someone who values her for who she is, not what she can do for him. She chose someone who sees her beauty, her intelligence, her kind heart. "You forget your place," William said dangerously. "I can have you whipped, thrown in prison, or worse. I can make sure you never work anywhere in this county again." "Then do it," Daniel said simply. "But understand this, I love Margaret more than life itself. I would rather face whatever punishment you can devise than live without her." Margaret felt her heart swell with pride and love for this brave man who was willing to sacrifice everything for her. She moved to stand directly beside him, taking his hand in hers. "And I love him," she declared, her voice carrying through the small cottage and out to where the other servants had gathered to watch the confrontation. "You gave me to him as punishment, William, but you gave me the greatest gift of my life. You gave me to a man who knows how to truly love someone." William's face turned purple with rage. "I'll destroy you both. I'll make sure you have nothing. That you're forced to beg in the streets." "We already have nothing according to you," Margaret said. "No titles, no fortune, no grand estate. But we have something you've never understood. We have each other. We have real love, honest work, and the respect of good people." Lady Isabella, who had been watching with growing frustration, stepped forward. "Just throw them out, William. Let them see how far their precious love gets them when they're starving in some ditch." But before William could respond, an unexpected voice spoke from the cottage doorway. "Father, that's enough." Everyone turned to see James, Margaret's 17-year-old son, standing in the entrance with his sisters Elizabeth and Anne behind him. The young man looked every inch his father's son, but his expression was one of disappointment rather than pride. "James?" William was clearly shocked to see his children there. "What are you doing here?" "We came to see Mother," Elizabeth said, her chin raised defiantly. "We've missed her terribly, and we wanted to understand what really happened." "You see what happened?" William gestured angrily at Margaret and Daniel. "Your mother has chosen to live in disgrace." "I see a woman who looks happier than she has in years," Anne, the youngest, said quietly. "I see someone who's been treated with kindness and respect, maybe for the first time in a long time." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at her children. "My darlings, I've missed you so much." "We've missed you too, Mother," James said, stepping into the cottage despite his father's presence. "And we've had time to think about what really happened that day. We remember how Father has been treating you, how unhappy you've been." "You children don't understand," William said, but his voice had lost some of its commanding edge. "We understand perfectly," Elizabeth said. "You humiliated our mother publicly and cast her out because she dared to ask for your attention and respect. You gave her to Daniel as a punishment, but he's treated her better than you ever did." Daniel, who had been silent during this family confrontation, spoke up. "Your children are remarkable people, Margaret. They see clearly and speak the truth with courage." "Don't address my children," William snapped, but James stepped forward. "Actually, sir, I want to hear what you have to say. You've cared for my mother when my father abandoned her. You've shown her kindness when she needed it most. I respect that, and I'm grateful to you." William stared at his son in shock. This wasn't how he had expected this confrontation to go. His own children were taking sides against him. "Father," Elizabeth said gently, "you still have time to make this right. You could show mercy, allow Mother to return with dignity. After what she's done, after this thus betrayal?" "The only betrayal here," James said firmly, "was yours when you stopped treating Mother like a person deserving of love and respect." Margaret looked at her children with overwhelming pride. They had grown into strong, principled people despite their father's influence. But she also knew that accepting William's mercy would mean giving up Daniel, and that was no longer possible. "Thank you, my dear children," she said softly. "Your support means everything to me, but I won't come back to live a lie. I found real happiness here, real love. I won't give that up, not even for the security of my old life." Daniel squeezed her hand. "There's something you should all know. I've been saving money for years, and I've purchased land in the next county, a small farm where we can start fresh, away from all this pain and anger." "You're running away?" William asked with contempt. "We're choosing freedom," Margaret corrected. "Freedom to live as equals, to work together, to love each other without shame or fear." Several of the servants who had gathered outside began to murmur among themselves. Mrs. Chun, the head housekeeper, stepped forward. "If you'll have us, my lady, several of us would like to come with you. We've seen how Lord William treats people, and we'd rather work for employers who treat us with respect." William's face grew even redder as he realized he was losing not just his wife, but the respect of his household staff. "Go then," he said through gritted teeth. "All of you. See how far you get without my protection and resources." Margaret looked at Daniel, then at her children, then at the servants who were willing to follow them. She felt a strength and certainty she had never experienced before. "We'll get as far as love and honest work can take us," she said. "And I believe that's farther than you can imagine." As the sun set that evening, Margaret and Daniel left Willowbrook Manor together, along with 6 loyal servants who chose respect over security. Her children embraced her goodbye, promising to visit the new farm once they were settled. The small caravan made its way toward their new life. carrying few possessions but abundant hope. Margaret sat beside Daniel on the wagon seat, watching the manor house disappear behind them. For the first time in months, she felt no sadness about leaving her old life behind. "Are you afraid?" Daniel asked softly as they traveled toward their uncertain future. Margaret considered the question, then smiled. "No, for the first time in my adult life, I'm not afraid. I'm excited." They reached their new farm 3 days later, a modest house with good soil and endless possibilities. As they stood together looking at their new home, Margaret realized that what William had intended as her greatest punishment had become her greatest salvation. She had learned that love has no age limit, that worth comes from within, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. In Daniel's arms, surrounded by people who chose to follow love over convention, Margaret had never felt more beautiful, more valued, or more alive.